It's time now for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, who do you trust? Sunak, Starmer, maybe reform, or basically none? On Wednesday, Rishi Sunak announced his top 5 priorities for the year ahead.
So, 5 promises. We will halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. Those are the people's priorities. They are your government's priorities, and we will either have achieved them or not.
Let's not forget about the maths. So there you have it, his top 5. At number 1, to halve inflation. This is despite inflation already slowing down globally, and the Bank of England estimating it would have halved by the end of 2030. In any case, 2023, sorry. At number 2, to grow the economy. Remember, it was Sunak who scrapped Liz Truss's mini-budget that was set to make Britain the highest growing economy in the G7 by 2025, and he replaced it with higher taxes and increased spending. At number 3, to reduce debt, well, coming from a man who borrowed over £400 billion when he was Chancellor during the COVID pandemic. Number 4, to cut waiting lists. Since 2010, the number of patients on NHS waiting lists has grown from 2.5 million to a staggering 7.2 million. And finally, number 5, to stop the boats. The Tories have made countless promises to reduce immigration. Remember the promise to cutting immigration by the tens and thousands. Net migration actually rose to record highs of more than 500,000 in the year to June 2022, with just under 46,000 illegal migrants crossing the Channel last year. So Keir Starmer criticised Sunak's pledges in a speech, standing in front of what looks like a transformer.
You saw it yesterday from the Prime Minister. Commentary without solution. More promises, more platitudes. No ambition to take us forward. No sense of what the country needs. 13 years of nothing but sticking plaster politics. It's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than it was before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. 7 million on waiting lists and rising.
So Keir Starmer proposed a partnership model where both the public and private sector would work together to fix the problems in the NHS. I think that's already happening anyway. He also announced a take-back control bill that would add more power to local authorities, which is quite ironic considering Starmer is an ardent Remainer who is now using the Key Vote Leave slogan. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust? Sunak, Starmer, perhaps somebody else, Reform, or maybe none of the above? I'm joined by the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, former Tory MP Neil Parish, and also former Labour Adviser and writer Scarlett MccGwire. Right, I'm going to start with you, Neil, because, I might as well. I've not spoken to you before. Who do you trust then, Rishi or Keir? Or neither?
Well, I bet you'd expect me to come down on the side of Rishi, but I think his big challenge is the delivery, because, of course, we've been in power now for 12 years, and therefore, getting down inflation, halving that, getting the debt down, getting the waiting list sorted out. And, of course, don't forget, we've had this huge pandemic, which has also borrowed a lot of money, but we've also created the waiting list. And, of course, the big issue, really, for many on the right of the Tory party and some of the right-wing voters is very much what are we going to do about immigration, and of course it's or the asylum seekers coming across. Very difficult. More needs to be done in France. We also need to be able to actually process them much quicker, because the idea.
But the thing is, we know all that because we're watching it, so it's sort of like, I mean,
I know that.
Agreed, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, Scarlett, Keir Starmer is saying that he's talking about sort of decentralised power structure, moving things away from Westminster. We've seen how disastrous that's looked in the terms of devolution. Does he actually think that's a vote winner, sort of devolved?
I actually think it's not just about votes, it's about the only way that we're going to sort out this country, because we talk about, or the Conservatives talk about levelling up. Where the money is not is outside Westminster, particularly in the north, but actually it's the same in the southwest. And actually you cannot have everything being done from Westminster and Westminster saying what goes on. I think it is really important that we give power and trust to the people, in the northeast, in the northwest.
I think you're creating more bureaucracy, though, more little centres of power, more bureaucracy, instead of actually doing something.
No.
Richard, I'm going to ask you then. What do you make of all of this? I mean, this is a bit of a mess. The two parties seem, a lot of people are politically homeless. Reform, I mean, what would they do differently?
Well, Nana, good afternoon. I noticed you didn't play the clip of my speech when I set out how the country's broken, and I put out the clear, most specific solution, because we all know that the country's not working. Nothing works in the country. We're paying the highest taxes. We've got the highest wasteful government spending. We've got the highest energy prices and the longest waiting list. But no solutions. Lots of warm words and waffle from Starmer and Sunak. I put forward a clear, big, bold solution, which is you've got to make Britain work. And to make Britain work, you've got to make work pay. And I believe that we've got to increase the starting point at which people pay income tax from 12.5 grand to 20 grand. That's 30 quid a week extra, which really helps the lowest paid, the least well off, because we've got 5 million people on out of work benefit. That's 1 in 8 of the population, completely written off by the main two parties. We've got to get them back into work. We've got to stop importing cheap overseas labour. We set out how to pay for it. And as for the boat, really, it's just laughable. This time last year, the then Prime Minister said, well, let's have a nationalities and borders bill and that'll solve the solution. That didn't work. So now Sunak says, let's have some more legislation. We've got a very clear 6-point plan that will stop the boats. It mainly revolves around leaving the ECHR, pick up and take back. It's a copy of the Australian solution that worked. No. So don't reinvent the wheel. Do something that you know works.
Neil, what do you think? He's saying, don't reinvent the wheel. The Tory party haven't really done much. I know you're no longer serving in the way you were before, but what's your view on this?
I do actually think that we've got to take the public spending as it is now, what we're spending on the health service. There's still a real problem with the number of people being able to get to be seen. But what you can't do is, like the opposition parties do, is suddenly decide, we'll have a new policy. But, of course, you've already got the major spending. We've already put another 14 billion into the health service. All of those things need. And yes, you could try and cut taxes, but don't forget Liz Truss tried that. As soon as the money market saw that, they ran the pound. The Bank of England had to come in and support it. So therefore, you can only actually cut taxes when we can make money in order to run the economy. And I think that is where I believe that Rishi Sunak will get it right. What we do now have is at least a competent Prime Minister that actually people believe in. And if you actually look at the polling that's going on at the moment, you'll actually see that actually Rishi Sunak is actually more popular than Keir Starmer, even though the party, the Conservative Party, is much lower.
Let Richard come back on that. Richard.
No, you forget, Sunak's been the Chancellor during this high rate of inflation. He created the debt. He's the guy who lifted the taxes. He's the guy that hasn't deregulated post-Brexit in order to create some growth. I've set out in my plans pre-Christmas on the healthcare, and here with our plan here, how you pay for this stuff. What they're choosing to do in this government, they're not making the sensible choices. They're not cutting government waste. They're, for example, letting the Bank of England unnecessarily pay 20 billion a year reserves on the money it printed to rich city institutions, which it doesn't need to do. All of this stuff are political choices the government's deciding to make and not make. And the waste in government spending is grotesque. And why write off 5 million people on benefits?
I wouldn't necessarily argue that there's not waste in government, but what I would say to you is that with the furlough scheme, the 400 billion borrowed actually to get us through COVID, I didn't see too many voices at the time actually saying, no, we shouldn't actually spend that money. In fact, I actually heard a lot of voices actually saying we should spend more. So therefore, once that money is spent, then it's got to be repaid. And like I said, I don't think you can actually put that at the door of Rishi Sunak.
A lot of people didn't say spend more. I think
there was quite a lot of political noise about it.
Last word to you, Scarlett.
Right. I think what we need is a fresh start, and we need somebody. Let's look at the National Health Service. Rishi's having a meeting to look at it instead of actually saying the real problem in the National Health. So there are two main problems. One is staff. There isn't enough, and they're leaving. And the solutions is retaining the staff and getting more in.
How?
Right. Well, the first thing, this is complicated. It's about pensions. It's about encouraging them to stay. It's about not saying that we're going to charge everybody to train as nurses. It's to train more doctors. It's actually to keep them.
Can I just say, we know those.
But also the other thing.
Richard, quickly.
And then I put out a full healthcare plan pre-Christmas that sets out how you get more, how you pay health and social care staff significantly more, how you fund that. And that will retain and attract staff urgently, because the NHS waiting list crisis is the greatest crisis this country has got today.
Well, listen, I agree with that. OK, 10 seconds to you, and then I'm going to go.
Yeah, Nana, the biggest issue also is social care. That's what we've got to get right, so that the 20% of people that are in hospital that need to actually go into nursing home, we've got to sort that out. And a lot of that would then help the whole general health service altogether.
And the first lie that Boris Johnson said was he had a plan, and he never, ever did.
But the Labour Party aren't in office, and they haven't been for a long time. Well,